One of my friends said to me this afternoon, I know what you're going to say tonight. Can you hear me? First, this is volunteer week, and we're all volunteers. So let's give ourselves a round of applause.
Yes.
The name Bylund is a legend in Auburn. I'm sure that we all know at least one Bylund. But tonight we're going to learn about one particular Bylund, a very distinctive gentleman. He's a war hero, he was. And he certainly was a man among men. We're going to hear the life of Arne Bylund. And we have not only one, but three speakers who are going to present this to us. Michelle and Susan Weagle. And we're happy to see Susan about, and Hillary Doyle. So I will turn the meeting over to these three ladies.
I have been through war. No comment. Thank you for staying with us and waiting till this month after we abruptly had to cancel on you last November, and I'm still paying the price for that fall that caused that. Most of the program tonight, my daughter Michelle is going to put together. Hillary and Michelle and I and almost everyone in our family has been gathering together all of the memorabilia, especially war memorabilia about my father. Some of you actually knew him, and a few people have commented on some of their experiences with him. He was quite a character, and we didn't know, as a child growing up, my sisters and I didn't know how much had happened in the war. As you've known from, I'm sure, the war exhibit, the soldiers didn't talk about it. And in fact, my dad had an expression whenever I would try and, get him to do an interview for the Auburn News or something, and say, I'm not one of those glamour boys. So it was, fortunately, people did come around and talked about it. And in my dad's case, and Michelle will touch on that, a lot of what we know now has to do with he joined the reunion for his squadron, and he had been going to their reunions, which are major, for about 20 years. Toward the end of his life, he wasn't able to travel as easily, so my niece Hillary and my sister Ruth Doyle, my nephew Brian Weck, who are all here tonight, accompanied him, which is a great thing because now they learned a lot of things and gathered a lot. So that being said, there'll be plenty of time for questions after, but my daughter Michelle has put together a very lovely program for us, and enjoy.
Thank you.
I don't know if that's going to reach. Can you hear me? Yep.
Yes.
I'll try to be loud. I teach second grade, so I'm used to yelling. As my mom said, I'm not an expert. I don't pretend to be an expert. Most of the things that you'll see in this presentation, I didn't know until after my grandfather passed away. We started uncovering some of the materials that he had saved, and I did a lot of research on the internet and found out a lot more about exactly what had gone on with his military career. So what it does say, the life of Arne Bylund, I could talk about that for probably 5 days. So I kind of narrowed it down to his military career and that portion of his life. Just a little bit of background. He was born in Auburn on August 21st, 1915. He was born on Bylund Ave, which I'm not sure if it was Bylund Ave then, but that's where the Bylunds lived. And the house that he was born in still stands on Bylund Ave. He was the second oldest of 4 brothers. His father was Bor Bylund, who was actually a Swedish citizen who attained his U.S. citizenship later on. And his mother was Anna Scholand, who is buried at Hillside Cemetery. His father's name is on the gravestone, but he's actually not buried there. He remarried and moved to Florida, and I believe he is buried in Florida. He was educated in Auburn, went to Stoneville School, went to Julia Bancroft, and then went to Commerce High in Worcester. He didn't finish high school. He left high school when his mom became sick with tuberculosis, and he and his brothers actually lived in a sanatorium for a period of time. And he did work, and this is actually one of the Swedish documents that we have from his father. We have actually a lot of primary source materials that it's amazing that this stuff was saved, because, I mean, I can't even imagine thinking to save all this, but we came up with so much. When you go to school and they talk about using primary sources, this is like a whole table of primary sources, which, I mean, it's amazing to me that it survived. But this is actually one of the Swedish documents that we have. And there's a picture of, actually, my grandfather's the one on the right, and his little brothers are the two other ones. Not a great picture. The military history. He first enlisted before the war in 1939, and we trying to figure this out. It took a while because we had about 5 discharge papers and from different times, and finally we sorted it out that when he originally enlisted, he went to California for flight training, which actually consisted of a pre-flight course, a primary flying course, a basic flying course, and an advanced flying course, all of which were 9-week segments in 4 different places. So he was in Santa Ana, California, Dos Palos, California, Chico, California, and eventually graduated from Yuma, Arizona on August 29th, 1943, at which point they discharged him and then re-enlisted him the next day as an officer. And he was then assigned to Columbia Air Force Base in South Carolina, which actually was an Army air base. The Air Force didn't become a separate service until 1947. So, and also as part of his training at Columbia, he went to navigation school in Louisiana. So we finally kind of sorted that all out between all the, this is a picture from when he was in California. And I had a question whether he had already met my grandmother before he did, and apparently he did, because this says at the bottom, lots of love, Evie, as he called my grandmother. So, there's that. Another picture. This is, I'm guessing, because there are no medals, that it's before he became an officer. After he finished his flight school, the last portion of the flight school was called transition training to learn to fly the B-25, which was for the part of the world that he was going to, kind of the workhorse of that part of the war. It was named after Billy Mitchell, who was an advocate of air power. I had a lot of trouble researching this because there were about 10 or more versions of the B-25. Some of them only had a crew of 3. Some of them were retooled to put guns in weird places. But for the most part, the ones that I found that were used in the part of the world where he was serving had a crew of 6 plus the pilot. And most of the pilots who flew them really liked it. They said it was very forgiving, a very fun plane to fly. Let me see if I can find what the positions were. There was a navigator, a pilot, a turret gun on the top, a radio operator, and a tail gunner. Some of the jobs were split. So there were 2 pilots, a navigator who was also a bombardier, a turret gunner who was also the engineer, a radio operator who was also the waist gunner, and the tail gunner. And some of the, I think I have some pictures. The only complaint that they had about this was that it was noisy, and I can attest to that because I was searching online for B-25s, and my mother was sitting at the table with me, and she's looking at me like, what is that? And I had found a video of a B-25 starting up. It took about 5 minutes to start, first of all, with the propellers going, but it was definitely not quiet. And they said that a lot of the people who did fly the B-25s actually ended up with hearing loss, which certainly my grandfather did have. So there's a picture of the B-25. A lot of people have seen the movie Memphis Belle and they think that that's B-25s. That was actually a B-17 that they used in that movie, but in the movie Pearl Harbor, they did rehabilitate B-25s and use them in that movie. So you can see them in action there. And the difference between the B-17 and the B-25 was the B-17 had the ball turret in the bottom and the B-25 had the turret on the top. And there's a lovely picture of the B-25 in flight. I don't know if you can see that very well, but basically to give you an idea that this was not a particularly comfortable plane to fly in. And my grandfather didn't talk about his actual missions a whole lot. He liked to tell us stories and make up things that he flew underwater and all kinds of stuff like that. But I do remember him saying that, you know, it was cold and it was uncomfortable because they were pretty much stuck for hours in this plane just to get to the bomb site, and then stuck, you know, the same amount of time just to get back to the base. So there wasn't a whole lot of room in there, and it was not particularly comfortable. There's a picture of him in one of the B-25s. This actually has a name on the plane. From what we can tell, we don't think his plane actually had a name. He certainly never told any of us about it. So this probably wasn't his actual plane. And there's a picture of the cockpit in the B-25, which, as you can see, it's not exactly luxurious. It's pretty, and when you've got two people in there too, there's not a whole lot of room for fun in there. And there's actually a picture of him in the cockpit, which, yeah, I don't even know what to say about that. I don't think I'd want to do it. This is the bombardier compartment in the B-25, which, again, I can't even, from what I looked up, they normally would carry about 8 500-pound bombs. So if you can imagine being stuck in a small compartment with 8 bombs for approximately 10 hours as you're flying to your site and back from the site, I can't imagine that it would have been very entertaining. That's just the manual for the B-25. This was probably one of the most produced aircraft for bombers during World War II. Pretty much everyone in the Mediterranean theater that was flying a bomber was flying B-25s. I put a couple of these up there because of the nose art. There are entire websites dedicated to the nose art on B-25s. I think probably partly because there's such a big space there compared to the fighter planes where there's not as much space. It was very common for them to, the nose art, and then put, keep track of how many bombs they dropped. So a lot of these, this one was Texas Gal. Sweet the Rain. This was a little twist on that, and they put cowboy boots instead of bombs. But we do have pictures of my grandfather in these original documents with a lot of these planes, these actual planes. So most of these, a lot of these were from his actual squadron.
Could you go back to those things at the front? Are those bombs that they dropped?
Yeah.
No.
Those are bombs. That was pretty common, I guess, to keep track. Yeah. So it was kind of like a, right. It was like a status symbol to have the most, you know, guns. And actually, I probably will mention this again later, but one of the people who was in the same bomb wing, not the same squadron with my grandfather, was Joseph Heller, who wrote Catch-22. He was in the 489th bomb squadron, and my grandfather was in the 486th. And he talks about, you know, in the book Catch-22, that first they tell you you've got to fly 25 missions, and then you go home, and then they tell you you got to fly 50, and everywhere I looked online, that really did happen. They told them, okay, 30, and then you're done, 40, and then you're done. So by the time my grandfather finished, he had flown over 70 missions. So if you can imagine, I mean, the whole plane was probably covered with bombs at that point. So there's a picture of my grandmother and grandfather. They were married, I believe, right after, they were married on September 4th, 1943. So he had actually been assigned to Columbia, South Carolina in August of 1943. So he obviously came home to get married and then went back to the base for his service. This is actually his passage for when he was shipped out, which kind of cracked me up because he was a pilot and yet they sent him on a boat to Europe. So, and I know that because he left the United States on April 12th, 1944, and he did not arrive in Casablanca until April 21st, 1944. So it took a good 10 days to get there. And from what I read everywhere, that everybody first went to Casablanca and then they were sent to their separate air bases around there. A lot of stuff like this, just like the Officers Club passes. Again, I don't know how it ever survived, but somehow it did. This is just an organizational chart because I was so confused with all these numbers of like which bomb group and what squadron. So this is how it actually works. There's the Army Air Force, which was the main commanding group, and then his Air Force was the 12th Army Air Force, which is the shirt I'm wearing. The 57th Bomb Wing had 4 groups under that. His was the 340th, which is the one on the far right, and then there were 4 squadrons underneath that, and his was the 486th. From what I can tell, your squadron was like your buddies, pretty much. It was, there's a picture, I think, coming up of the officers of the 46th, and there's about maybe 25 guys. So if you figure 25 officers and then probably 6 crew members under each of them, that's about how big your squadron was. And from the pictures that we have of him at reunions and things, these are the guys that he hung around with that were his buddies in the war. This also helped me because I couldn't figure out what was going on with all the numbers. These are all the separate air forces that were under control by the Army. His is this one. Oh, I can't move it, but his is the one right above Africa, the triangular one. This is a little bit hard to read also, but basically shows, excuse me, how once they started at the bottom of Italy and basically moved up. So the job of the armies that were stationed in Sicily and in Corsica, which is where my grandfather was stationed, their job was basically to slowly move up Italy and take out targets in advancing north so that the actual army could get in there and liberate some of those cities. So that kind of shows you that. This is another just picture of where the B-25s the B-25 bombing groups were stationed. They were pretty much covering the whole Mediterranean area. And this actually, there is still a memorial on Corsica to the 57th Bomb Wing, which I believe you can still see today. There were, as I said, the 57th Bomb Wing was a huge group of a bunch of different squadrons. So there were quite a few men that were serving in Corsica at that time. This was the name of the Army Air Base, and it no longer exists. It's like a Olive Grove or something today. But it was, at that point, one of the bigger air bases in the area. And interestingly, when I was doing research, and my grandfather never mentioned this to me, but he went over in August of 43? And no, April of 44. And this air base was actually attacked in May of 1944. So this is a picture that I found actually online. This wasn't his, but I was surprised to see some of the things that they actually had on the base. There was a baseball field, there was a swimming hole. So they really did, I mean, I think they tried to make it as comfortable as they could, but obviously the situation wasn't just like home. We have a bunch of pictures of his tent from there he is, relaxing. I did see that the officers generally got the shade. So this is obviously an officer's tent because he got to put it near a tree. But another thing that he did talk about was apparently they had tons of animals always around on at the base that would just like stray dogs that would come, and we have a bunch of pictures of those. I didn't want to bore you with dogs, but and a lot of the Italians that actually lived in the area surrounding the base would come onto the base and they would hang around with them. Again, just a couple of things that I can't believe these survived: the snack bar ticket and the officers club. Basically, I think life, from what I heard from my grandfather and from reading other things online, life on the base pretty much revolved around the missions and the officers club. So when you weren't on a mission, you were at the officers club or sleeping to get ready for your next mission. And this is the lovely looking officers club for the 340th bomb group. Yeah, it doesn't look that great, but I suppose if that's all you've got, you make the best of what you have. There are a lot of pictures of the B-25s coming back pretty banged up from missions. And from everything that I saw online, this plane was the ultimate war horse. And there were stories of planes that had had 5 belly landings and were still flying, and had been patched up with tape and all kinds of other things, and they just kept going. So I guess I should feel fortunate that he was able to fly in one of the more sturdy aircraft compared to some of the other ones. This is another picture from the officers area, and he was also really good about labeling his pictures. Hillary was just saying that just before he passed away, a friend of his had sent him a picture and asked him to name the people in the picture, and he knew at least half of them. So he definitely, within his squadron, remained close with all of those people. Here's some of the bombs. You couldn't get me within 10 miles of that right now. But it's so easy to forget that the danger that was just always around these guys over there. And like I said, from what I read, usually the B-25 would carry about 8 of these. So at one point it even said that there was a problem with the fuel on the B-25 because when it would fly, it was so weighted down by the bombs that it actually couldn't use the fuel in the bottom of the tank because the gravity wouldn't let it come up. And after they dropped the bombs, they would finally be able to get it. This is a picture of after the base was attacked. This was not one of his pictures. I actually found it online. But we were looking he did keep a log of all of his missions. And it had already been packed in my mother's car today when I went to look to see what he had written on this day, because he never talked about it. And a lot of the things that I read online from other people who were stationed there, they didn't really want to talk about it either. So it sounds like it wasn't particularly good time at that base. But what they did say is that it was retaliation for a bombing that they had done the day before, and it was German fighter planes that came and dropped flares and things like that, but the B-25s were already loaded, so everything was just blowing up because of it. But it was hard to find a lot about that. This is one of his crews. So obviously this one, there's 6, he would have been the pilot. It says on the bottom, my crew just after a mission. So he didn't label which one did which job, but one would guess that those were the navigator, the engineer, the gunners, and the co-pilot. Another picture. I saw about 10 billion of these pictures looking online. It was just the classic ultimate pose of that era, I guess. This is actually the picture that he had to name the people in. the officers of the 486. And he literally did remember, I would say, 3/4 of the names. So clearly this was the group that he was closest to there, and he pretty much remained close to them up until the day that he died. He was actually, was he planning to go? Yeah, he had actually gone to his last reunion of his squadron, or of the bomb wing, in August, and then he died in December, so November, December. This is the officers' area, which doesn't look any fancier to me than the peon area, but again, from what I heard, they tried to make the most of it and make it as home-like as they could, because they were there for the duration. Just another picture of bombs, and it says the 486 area. And here's where they sent the planes to die, the graveyard. But again, it's amazing the stories that I saw about the B-25, how much it could actually take before it was considered a goner. A lot of these don't look too bad, actually. Everything that I read about the units that were in Corsica, this was their job, basically, was to take out the Brenner Pass, which was, it's a mountain pass through the Alps between Italy and Austria. It was the main supply line for the Germans to get things to Austria and to other parts of Europe. So pretty much every target was either a rail line on the Brenner Pass, or a city where there was manufacturing going on, or just to take out bridges. His unit was actually called the Bridge Busters at some points, because that's all they were doing, was taking out bridges. So the Po River was also part of this. As long as they took out the bridges over the Po River, their goal was to disable the supplies from getting anywhere. This is actually a map of the Brenner Pass, which is really hard to read, but those were just some of the sites along the way that they were bombing. And when I looked to see where he had gotten his commendations, almost all of them were cities on the Brenner Pass. So obviously that was what he spent most of his time doing. This is typical of the formations that they would fly in. Let me see if I can see. Oh, black. The missions on the Brenner Pass were considered particularly difficult because they had to fly low enough to hit the targets, but the Germans had set up flak guns in the mountains, which meant that the distance between the flak guns and the planes was not very much. So there was pretty much a constant danger when they went there of getting hit by the flak guns, and apparently they just did it constantly, and they were coming back with holes in their planes all the time from the flak. And also the weather tended to not work in their favor a lot of the time. If you read in his journal that he kept, they were constantly being ready to go and then being told to stand down because the weather had changed, and if they had to fly under the cloud cover, they were too close to the flak guns, so they generally couldn't fly if there was cloud cover. So there was a lot of sitting around waiting for the weather to change so that they could do it. There's another loading a bomb. Again, you couldn't pay me enough. And this I just had to put on here because that pin was like what stood between you and 500 pounds of explosives. So I don't know how the bombardiers must have had nerves of steel, because I could not have done that. This one, it's labeled our ships. The 486th and 47th, 48th, 49th all labeled their planes with the last number of their squadron. So any of the planes that have a 6 were 486th. And actually, the one thing that I wanted from my grandfather when he passed away was his B-25 model, because he'd always had that hanging in his basement, and not until I started looking at this did I realize that's why there was a 6 on the B-25 that he made, because that was his squadron. This one, I don't know what to say about it, because it says it's an ME-109 that he shot down. He wasn't a fighter pilot, so I don't know where he shot it down or how. He was flying a bomber, but in any case, that's what they were pretty much up against from the German side. Those are the kind of planes that had the attack on the base in Corsica. We have several pictures of medal ceremonies, and I'm guessing that this one is the air medal ceremony because my grandfather in the middle has his air medal and the person next to him doesn't have his air medal yet. So guessing that that's what this one was. And there is the air medal. It's very difficult to read on there, but the actual a copy of the citation is up here. A little bit about the air medal, if I can find it. It's awarded to anybody who has distinguished himself or herself by meritorious achievement while participating in aerial flight, may be made to recognize single acts of merit or heroism, or for meritorious service over a longer period. And he did, this air medal citation is, can't see the date on it, August 19th, 1944. So he had been there about 5 months at that point when he got the air medal. And the oak leaf clusters, actually, I was confused whether they went with the Distinguished Flying Cross or the air medal. I believe they actually go with the air medal, but I'm not sure. But these were, like I said, these were the cities where the citation said that he had received the oak leaf cluster, which is like another medal. And apparently 8 is quite a lot to have, I don't know. But it was interesting to note that at the end, the very last one was in Yugoslavia. So they had made it farther at that point. I didn't actually check, but I would guess that kind of in order, they might be advancing north. And obviously they were doing sorties into both Italy and France at the time. So the ones in Italy are almost all on that Brenner Pass area that I showed. And then this one is the Distinguished Flying Cross, which is the oldest military aviation award. And it actually is supposed to symbolize, the cross symbolizes sacrifice and the propeller symbolizes flight. And the combination of those symbols make it an award for heroism or achievement of people involved in aviation. So it seems like the Air Medal and the Distinguished Flying Cross are pretty much the cream of the crop in aviation medals anyway. And afterward, I could, it could take 10 years to tell you, but they told me half an hour or so. After the war, he came back to Auburn, went back to working at Worcester Wire Works. He built, along with his brothers, his house, which he lived in for the rest of his life on Carroll Street, which Hillary now lives in. And he built it really well, because it's a lot more well-built than my house. But, and he did re-enlist as a National Guardsman, and he was in the National Guard for about 3 years after that. And again, his bomb wing reunions were like, that was the highlight of his year every year. And he went to them all over the country and always came back, with stories. And a lot of the actual websites that, when I researched, are people that he would see at the reunions every year. And there's actually, besides Catch-22, which was Joseph Heller, who was in his bomb wing but not squadron, there was a man in his squadron whose daughter, I think it's his daughter, wrote a book about his actual squadron. His name was Scotty Rower, and a lot of the pictures that we have from the reunions are pictures of my grandfather with this man, Scotty Rower. And that's about it. But we have a lot of stuff up here for you to look at. And I don't know. Any questions? Was I too short?
Anybody got any questions?
Very loud. Very well done.
Well, thank you.
I certainly
We have
had.
a question. We have a question.
Who has a question?
Over there in the right.
What's your question, sir?
You know if we ever flew out of the Albany airport at all?
I think he did.
My mother thinks he did.
Wait,
so she'll answer your question.
You may have the answer to our question about, when my father first enlisted, we have a picture of him with a big group of people that appears to be in Auburn, and would that
I
be,
think I know the picture.
there you go.
I know a lot of the
It's a big picture, it's in Hillary's attic.
I know a lot of the pilots from the Albany airport did end up in the military, and I've seen the photograph. I don't know who they are in it, but I know there was one in front of the hangar.
Is it in front of the hangar? A hangar, Hillary?
I don't know.
It's a big framed picture of it. It could well
I
have
have a
been.
picture of it.
All right, it could have been. A lot, actually, we have some other family members here today, including the Bylund family historian, Kay Sheldon. So, you know, if there's anything you have about his childhood too, and growing up on Bylund Ave, and it's a funny thing. One of the thoughts that always comes to my mind is my father never finished high school. You know, after he went to the sanatorium when his mother was ill and she subsequently died, he didn't have a lot of education, and yet he was a very intelligent man, and he was able to become a pilot and an officer, and he was his writings are very very articulate and precise. So it's nowadays that wouldn't happen. that couldn't happen, but it was something.
So he had enough education.
He did. He was
He had enough.
go for Auburn schools, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. He only had gone to school, we think, through his sophomore year in high school.
Yeah.
But he read a lot and he learned a lot. He did, and he was very mechanically inclined and mathematically inclined, and those are the kinds of skills that he would have needed.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
I enjoyed it very much.
Look at all the things.